Okay, folks, let's get on the way so that we can get the full benefit of the time that we have. I wanted to tell you what we're going to do today so that you can see how we are moving along to achieve it. Having spent much of last time going over with you Marx's commitment to focus on class analysis, and having stressed that by class Marx meant something unique and different, namely the production and distribution of surplus, and how that happens in societies, and how it shapes what goes on in this society, and how Marx is going to focus us on it because he thinks other people have neglected, missed, or ignored, or downplayed this phenomenon. In other words, Marx saw his work as contributing to the general understanding, not just of people in general, although he was happy to do that, but he was particularly interested in contributing to the overthrow of capitalism. He didn't like it. And he felt that previous revolutionaries, by the way, I'm stressing this because a couple of you communicated to me, which I'm appreciative of, and so I want to respond to what you asked. Marx was concerned that previous efforts to bring about liberty, equality, and fraternity, if you recall the great ideals of the French Revolution, hadn't succeeded. Marx was by no means of the opinion that he was the first radical on the planet. Hardly. He knew of many, many others, past and present, around him, and he felt that he wanted to contribute something that would make the next revolutionary upsurge more successful in bringing about the goals of revolutionaries like liberty, equality, and fraternity than had been the case before. And so he felt that this understanding of the organization of surplus, that every social system has a particular way of producing and distributing surplus, was precisely something that previous revolutionaries had not understood, had not therefore focused on, and had not therefore developed a program for. And that failure undermined all of their other efforts, many of which were interesting and successful. So, for example, hopes for the ending of poverty, or hopes for an egalitarian society, or hopes for democracy had come to naught because, in part, the revolutionaries who struggled for those things had not understood that every society functions the way it does, in part because of how it organizes the surplus. They hadn't attended to that question, they hadn't understood it, and so their programs for change ignored it. Didn't worry about the problem of reorganizing the surplus, and therefore often didn't. So that the organization of the surplus before and after the revolution were the same, and so it undermined those revolutionary changes that were achieved. And so Marx's idea was Marx, could contribute by really getting people to understand this issue of the organization of surplus. How in every society, some people are designated to produce a surplus, other people get it, and they in turn distribute it to yet other people, and how that's all worked out is a crucial part of how a society works, how a society evolves, and what its qualities are. So it's not a focus on class because it's more important than other parts of society. It isn't. It's a focus on class because it is a neglected element. It has been missed, and the social costs of not understanding it, especially for revolutionaries, has been awful. And so Marx focuses on it. The phrase, therefore, that opens the Communist Manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, is followed by remarks that clearly show Marx meant to say, and he pretty well said it, that this is the hidden history of society. It's the part of society that is occluded, that we don't see, that hasn't been understood. And therefore he is going to focus on it. Okay? So that was a general project. And it's that general project that lies behind Marx's effort to locate and identify in the contemporary society he lived in, capitalism, 19th century, mid-19th to make his work show people that this capitalism has right at its core the production and distribution of the surplus, that it works in a very particular way and has enormous social consequences that any revolutionary must understand, because any successful revolution requires to transform it. If you're going to go from a non-democratic to a democratic system, from an unequal to an egalitarian system, then part of the job is to transform the class structure. And he's going to make that case after he shows us how capitalism is in fact a system with a very particular production and distribution of surplus systems in it. Capital is the book, the work, where he does this. Much of his earlier writing, some of you know some of the names, the Grundrisse, the theory of capital, the reproduction of capital, wage, labor, and capital, value, price, and profit, very famous pamphlets that he wrote. Most of those are preliminary sketches, like a painter might make, of different parts of what will eventually be one major canvas. That canvas is Marx's Capital. And just a word for those of you that are interested, Marx was a highly skilled writer. He had been a philosopher, he was a practiced journalist, he did an enormous amount of writing. He was very clever, very schooled in the arts and the sciences. So when he finally came to write Capital, it is the work of a very mature, skilled, multi-talented writer. I tell you this because I would urge you, as a piece of literature, read it. You will enjoy it. You will find, by the way, for those of you interested in economics, very few parallels in the history of economics. For example, a writer who, in the middle of an explanation of a complicated economic point, who quotes Dante's Inferno or Greek playwrights, and he does it all the time. And it's full of humor. Now, Marx only wrote volume 1. Volumes 2 and 3, although they had his name on it, weren't written by him. That is, bits and pieces were, but putting it together was done after Marx died. That's why he couldn't write it. So his colleague, Friedrich Engels, basically put together volume 2, and the student of Marx and Engels, a German Marxist named Karl Marx, put together volume 3. Now, they put together based on Marx's voluminous notebooks. He wrote a great deal, but it really wasn't a finished piece of writing the way volume 1 was, which if you read them, you will see. But read volume 1. What we do today is all about what's going on in volume 1, so it's the relevant thing. If you want a shortened version, the early chapters, as I believe I mentioned to you last time, of Paul Sweezy's The Theory of Capitalist Development, will give you this. If you're interested in an even shorter and condensed version, there is a textbook in economics of which I'm one of the co-authors, and my frequent colleague Steve Resnick is another one. It's called Economics, Marxian versus Neoclassical. It's the only textbook in the profession that systematically compares Marxian economics to bourgeois economics. We wrote the book 25 years ago, 1987, 22 years ago. It was published by the Johns Hopkins University Press, and wonder of wonders, for a textbook, it is still in print. It's never gone out of print, and the reason it's in print, it's the only book that does this. So any professor who wants to give his students a comparative sense of how conventional economics is different from Marxian, this is the only book. It also contains in the middle a chapter that goes through the basics of Marxian theory, and you can use that if you want a kind of quickie way to get in to this material. Okay, so we're going to begin, as Marx does in Capital Volume 1, to analyze capitalism with the goal of showing that it's all about, that is capitalism is, it's all about the production and distribution of surplus. And what I mean by that is that that's a core part of the story. And Marx shows that in a way that no one else had done it before. Well, they didn't have his goal. Of course they didn't do it. It's not that they were limited or didn't see, but they had a different objective when they analyzed the system than Marx. Marx was to be critical, to overthrow it, and then that last thing I told you, to remedy this defect in other understandings that they didn't get at this particular question. So how then does Marx do the job? He begins by talking about commodities. Literally how the first chapter of volume 1 of Capital begins. It's about commodities. So we have to, because I want you all to understand what's going on here, we have to ask the question, why did he start there? Especially having just told you last time and this time that he wants to get at this business of surplus. Why is he talking about commodities? Very interesting. And the answer I would give you, not all Marxists agree, but the answer I would give you is this. At the time Marx wrote, that was the way everybody began a book about economics. It was as if everybody believed, as self-evident and obvious, that the place you begin with a book about economics is about markets where commodities are exchanged by people. And so Marx made the decision, which all writers, particularly writers who want to write against a dominant tradition, they always have a problem. You want the people who are used to thinking of the topic in a particular way to stay with you long enough to maybe be persuaded to think in a different way. But if you hit it right in the face at the beginning with a completely different way, you may very well lose them. This will look bizarre, strange, weird, and so Marx made a decision. I'm not sure it's the right one. And by the way, if you ever read his correspondence, you will see an immense exchange between Engels and himself about how they're writing, how Marx is writing volume 1, and his anxieties about doing it the way he did it. Anyway, he decided to, if you like, pander to his presumed audience. Remember, in mid-19th century, we're talking about European societies in which the majority of people were not literate. So when you write a book in the middle of the 19th century, you're writing for a very limited audience. He's writing a 3-volume work in economics. You can imagine how big an audience he's likely to get. So he's writing for a well-educated audience, one that's used to reading and used to reading in economics. So he begins with commodities, because that's what everybody talks about. Goods and services that have a price attached to them because they are exchanged in the market. But Marx is a clever philosopher who's writing economics. So he wants to make this commodity in the language that Bertolt Brecht, after whom this building is named, used to love to do in his plays. He developed a theory of playwriting that said that one of the ways you draw an audience in and make the play an exciting moment for them is, and he used a very important word in Marxian theory, estrangement. You draw them into something that they think is familiar, and then you make it strange. So they begin to realize that because something is familiar doesn't mean it has to be that way. It can be other, it can be different. So I want to do that with you now a little bit with commodities. What is a commodity? Very simple. And by the way, this definition applies not just to Marx, but to others as well, non-Marxists. A commodity is an object that has 2 key qualities. It's produced by human labor, as are all products in human history. But the commodity has a second quality. It goes from the producer to the consumer by means of a very particular institutional arrangement. The producer, for example, the bread maker who makes bread, how does the bread maker get the bread he or she makes into the hands of the consumers who will eat that bread to nourish their bodies? In a market economy, the mode of passage, the mechanism whereby the product goes from the producer to the consumer is by means of something we call a market. It's an institution in which the following dance is performed. The baker, I will give you 2 loaves of this rye bread, but only if you give me 3 of your shirts, or 2 of your tomatoes, or 6 of your software program, whatever. That is, the mechanism of distribution involves a quid pro quo exchange, a kind of endless haggling in which the producer seeks to get from the buyer, the consumer, as much of something else as possible before parting with what he's produced. The consumer has to give something in exchange for what the producer gives up. Or to use the language of economics, the product goes from the producer to the consumer by means of market exchange. When a product of labor goes from producer to consumer by means of market exchange, it's called a commodity. If the good is produced but gets from producer to consumer in some other way, it is not a commodity. Let me give you an example. I take my daughter on a walk in the woods. I break a twig from a little tree, and with my knife I carve a little figurine, which, because I enjoy doing it and my little daughter loves it, I hand to her so she can play with it. I am the producer of the figurine. She is the consumer of the figurine. But there has been no market exchange. Consequently, the figurine is a product of labor, but it is not a commodity. Another example. You're having dinner at your family. Your mother makes a lovely dinner because you're visited. She produces a product, mashed potatoes, and she hands it to you, and you consume these potatoes. A good has been produced, it has been passed from producer to consumer, but it is not a commodity. In human history, as far back as we know, there are infinite examples of human beings using labor to produce things that go from producer to consumer without market exchange. In fact, the vast majority of human history has involved an enormous array of production, an enormous array of consumption, and no markets at all. Very important for you to understand that the market is not some fundamental human invention that has always been there. It mostly hasn't. Indeed, in our own society right now, a vast amount of goods and services are produced right now in the United States. They go from producer, person number one, to consumer, person number two, without market exchange. For examples, in your family, countless things are done. By you for your cousin Fred, by your mother for your father for the grandmother, by your grandmother for the grandchildren. Lots of goods and services are produced and passed to a consumer without market exchange. In fact, a story I love to tell to my students, if at the next Thanksgiving dinner, after the good turkey and all that was consumed, and your father said to you across the table, "Oh, would you mind, we've accumulated a lot of garbage from the dinner, the bones, would you take them outside and put them in the garbage?" And you, as the young man, said, "Sure, Pop, $4. In that act of demanding $4, you're making the effort to introduce into the family's distribution system the market as a mechanism. And to that, your father will lean across the table and smack you in the face and give you the following lecture, a very revelatory lecture. "That's disgusting," he will say to you. "In this family," he will continue, "we love each other and we give each other as a result of the love we feel. What you just did was to negate the love by demanding payment. What your father is saying, for which he could be arrested, is that love and markets are incompatible institutions inside the family. We Marxists say, outside too. Think about it. In any case, Marx is clever, and he has noticed, as many before him did, and he gives them credit, that one of the remarkable things about capitalism is that it has gone further than any other system in commodifying human labor. That is, making the goods and services that are produced into commodities. And what does that mean? By making sure that the mechanism that gets goods and services from producers to consumers is quid pro quo exchange in a market. Capitalism has expanded markets. But remember, for Marx, that doesn't negate the fact that in modern society, as through history, much more in the way of passage of goods from producer to consumer happens in non-market forms than in market forms. It's a particular and peculiar way. Let me quickly, because I don't have time, give you examples of other systems. In many societies, the producers get together at a certain time, collect all that they've produced, and then how is it distributed? By a priest, by a council of elders, by a drawing of straws, by a notion of what's an appropriate customary distribution. All of those have been used for thousands of years in an endless variety of societies to accomplish the distribution from producer to consumer. Markets are not necessary, markets are not prevalent, markets are no more or less efficient than anything else. And they haven't pleased human beings any more than non-market mechanisms have, if we look at the long sweep of history. So Marx is going to begin with commodities, but he's going to debunk the whole business all at the same time. But we do not, as he will say a little later in Volume 1, he doesn't want us to fetishize commodities. He doesn't want us to get all weirded out as if there's something fetish-like about a commodity. All a commodity means is that a society has chosen a particular way to get goods from producers to consumers by means of endless haggling. Now a step back, I can see from some of your faces, to give this a context. Precisely because markets were not, prior to capitalism, a major way that goods and services were distributed, the arrival of capitalism, which, as you're going to see later from Marx, has nothing to do with market exchange. Nothing. But the coincidence that the arrival of capitalism is also the commodification of so many goods and services has led Marx and Marxists, and many since, to collapse these two things that are separate as if they weren't. That is, to see in Marxism a critique of the market. Now here's a problem. As you're going to see in the rest of today, Marx wasn't interested in markets. He only talks about them, as I told you, because that's what everyone expects a book in economics to begin with. By the way, if you pick up a textbook today in economics conventional, it begins with markets. Demand and supply, that's about markets. That's what it is. So what Marx confronted, we still have. But my point here is that you get clear that for Marx, the market is something different. So Marx, if you ask me the question bluntly, did Marx like markets? The answer is, he did not. He thought they suck. That wasn't the particular word he used, but that was the idea. Markets are no good. And by the way, he didn't hate markets because of how they got the goods and services distributed, although he made criticisms of that too. He was more almost aesthetic in his horror of markets. A little bit like that father at Thanksgiving. To set up a market means that you set up everybody in the following endless quest, which you should all recognize because you all do this. You enter into countless exchanges in your life, countless moments with another person where you are engaged in a market exchange with that person. And that market exchange has the following rule which governs your behavior. I want to give as little as possible to this shithead and get as much as I can from him. What kind of human relationships are going to be built up among people if the way that they distribute the goods and services they all need amongst each other is premised on this peculiar enmity approach? Compare that to a system in which the elders of the community, based on a notion of what's appropriate, what's needed by different people, distributes goods and services around by some concept of need, of appropriateness, of custom, of fairness. There would be problems with that system too, of course, but you can see why a Marxist, almost on an aesthetic grounds, finds this peculiar institution odious. But actually, if you want criticisms of market, don't read Marx. You don't need Marx. The critique of markets is hundreds of years older than Marx. Markets come into middle to late feudalism all over Europe. Some of the greatest writers, for example, if you want an analysis of the horror of markets, read the French novelist Balzac, who was admired by Marx precisely because his novels made such staggeringly appropriate criticisms. There's a whole tradition in European literature of denunciation at the height of feudalism, of the crumbling of the old feudal order as it is being invaded by the grubby merchant, instead of being driven by the noble ideals of chivalry in feudal and medieval Europe, of noble behavior according to the dictates of God. Instead, everybody's haggling. For those of you that are interested, those parts of European feudalism that were never allowed to become lords and serfs because they weren't Christian, ended up being the merchants, Armenians, Greeks, Jews. So the horror of this new trading system got attached to the individuals who were the early traders. That's the origin of European anti-Semitism, with its long, horrible history. The Jews were the bringers, and they weren't the only ones, but they were the bringers of the trading mentality, which was seen to undo the old feudal society governed by the dictates of religion and morality and ethics. Nothing was more horrible to say Thomas Aquinas or dozens of others than the following modern notion. What do you get for that commodity? Whatever the market will bear. What? You mean you're going to snatch all the money that poor widow has for the 3 pieces of bread you give her because she's desperate and that's moral? In the high medieval time, the Roman Catholic Church got so freaked out by this that they imposed rules on commerce. For those of you that are interested, Thomas Aquinas, all in there. They had the theory of the just price. The church said the price should not be what you get by haggling in a market. That, the church said, is obscene and against Jesus' teachings. The price should be what's just. It should be governed by concept of justice. This is an institution for whom the market is a very questionable enterprise. Since the market won and the church lost, that part of Catholic teaching is gone. The church, by the way, also had a very famous teaching called the prohibition of usury. You all know what usury is? Usury is charging interest for a loan. The Roman Catholic Church excommunicated large numbers of people for charging interest. Here was the reasoning of the church, to give you an idea of how horrible market behavior, buying, selling, lending, borrowing, how horrible it was. You were thrown out of the church, and here was the reasoning. If a person wants to borrow from you, that person must be in need. And the good Christian thing to do when confronted by a person in need is to give him something. not to give him something that he has to give you back more than you give him. That's disgusting, and Jesus will personally shit on you for doing that. You're out. You're gone. You're gone. What? I didn't make this up. The market is a very contested institution. And when you pick up an American newspaper or you listen to television in which markets are presented as this fundamental institution that human beings have discovered because it's the best, this is all crap. This is the thinnest ideological junk imaginable and has been rejected by all manner of people in addition to Marx. But you don't need Marx for that. But it is true, Marx didn't like markets. But markets were not Marx's interest. He begins with commodities because capitalism in the Europe that he lived in had developed commodification to an extraordinary extent. And so he wanted to start with that, to recognize that, but he wanted to take his readers from a discussion of commodities to the very different question of labor, which you know from what we did last week is where he's going. And I want you to have that in your mind so you'll understand the logic of where we do it now, because I'm going to take you, like Marx does, from the discussion of markets to what the real issue is later. Sir? Yeah,
you said earlier that Marx didn't really make an argument on market efficiency and inefficiency. Is there a reason for that? Did he find markets?
No, he didn't make, he didn't make an argument about it in those terms. Marx never talks much about efficiency. The fetish of efficiency, the notion of, excuse me, I shouldn't let my views show so bad. The notion of efficiency is one that Marx has little or no use for. So maybe I should give you a word, wow. That comes from his training in philosophy. That's really not about economics. For a philosopher, particularly for a philosopher interested in mathematics, the concept of efficiency is absurd. It is an empty set. It's one of those things which, when you look at it, dissolves. Let me explain. What does it mean to say something is efficient? Basically, you can do a lot of reading about it, but here's what you will get. To measure to identify something as efficient, here's what you do. You say, okay, I'm going to do this thing, it's efficient. And by that I mean the good things that happen as a result of it outweigh the bad things. I'll give you an example. A debate among Obama's advisors, should interest rates be lowered by 1%? If some of his advisors say, yes, we should, and the president says, well, why? The answer, it's efficient. Well, what do you mean? Well, the good things that will happen if we lower interest rates, here they are, when you add them all up, are better than the bad things that will happen. Or to use the language of efficiency, which is often called cost-benefit analysis, you measure the benefits, you measure the costs, and if the benefits are larger than the cost, it's efficient. And you do it. And if the costs are larger than the benefits, it's not efficient. You don't do it. Are you all with me? Should the hospital in your neighborhood build another wing for cancer patients? Big public meetings and hearings, yes, no. And the hospital comes in and says, okay, we understand this controversy. We're going to bring in a cost-benefit analysis team. I've been on those. They have one very good virtue. Lots of pay. Get money for this. So I do it sometimes. Here's what we do. We come in and we count the costs. We add them up. And we count the benefits. And we add them up. And this is very hard. If one add up is larger than the other one, you got your answer. If the costs are more than the benefits, inefficient, don't build it. If the benefits are larger than the costs, efficient, build it. This, by the way, is presented by the hospital as a non-debatable issue. This isn't about point of view or breadth. This is an objective measure. Who can complain? If you still don't, if the benefits are larger than the cost, and you still oppose the project, you're sick. I mean, we just did the work here. The benefit are larger than the cost. Who could object? Okay, what's the problem here? The problem here is, and you all know this already, so I'm just going to pull it out a little bit more to the forefront of your brain than it already sits. What are the consequences of an act? Building a hospital wing, raising or lowering an interest. What are the consequences? The answer? The consequences are infinite in number. Come on. The consequences of building a wing to a hospital, they're going to change the temperature in the immediate environment. They're going to change the traffic patterns. They're going to change the wind direction. They're going to make a speeding ambulance go on this street rather than... You know how many things happen when you change something in the world? An infinity. Not only that, they don't all happen now. Some of them only happen 2 years from now, 4 years from now, and 6 years from now. What are the consequences of an act? Nobody knows. You couldn't possibly know what all the consequences are of building a hospital or raising an interest rate. Nobody has ever known all of them because they stretch infinitely out into the future. If you build that wing of the hospital, there'll be people coming for cancer tests who didn't used to come. They'll be driving in from the suburbs. They're going to change the use pattern of the roads. That's going to mean the roads have to be refinished at certain times. That's going to cost money to the neighboring town. Who the hell knows all of this? It would take you a lifetime to list all the possible, and by that time, you'd be a very old man or woman. And you'd only be at the beginning of your task, because not only do you have to know what all the consequences are, but you have to add them all up. Value them. How are you going to do that? What exactly is the value of the extra 4 accidents a year that happen because ambulances are running this route rather than that one? What? You can't do it. And the same goes for the costs and for the benefits. They're infinite in number. Nobody can measure them all. Nobody can know them all. So when you hear, I've measured the costs and the benefits, you're listening to a liar. He or she couldn't have done that. And when you actually sit down with a cost-benefit analysis, you see it immediately. They've looked at, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever the budget allowed for. Not 512, not 6,002, just a bunch. But here's the worst of it. I referred, as if I knew it, what the consequence of building that wing of the hospital, or the consequence of lowering an interest rate. And I said, for example, accidents of an ambulance. But of course, what I call the consequence of an act, that I'm going to measure the efficiency of, I can't do that. I can't say it's the consequence just of what I'm measuring. Accidents over there with an ambulance happen because of wind direction, visibility, tire pressure. Wait a minute. All the things I say are consequences, costs and benefits resulting from something I'm measuring are never the results of only that. Other things play a role too. So you don't know whether the consequence of that thing you're measuring, the cost or the benefit, is really the consequence in that 80%, 40%, 20%, no percent. In other words, you can't do it. Nobody knows what all the costs and benefits of something are, and nobody knows whether those costs and benefits aren't the result of many other influences, which they usually are. Therefore, the statement, I've measured the costs and benefits so that I can tell you whether something is efficient or not, is a mathematical and philosophical nonsense. Some of you have heard the funny story about how very learned teachers in the Roman Catholic Church in the 13th century held debates all over Europe around the following question. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? And the reason they had this debate was that angels were conceived of having no dimensions. So they had no width and length, which raised the question, billions of them could be on the head of a pin since they have no dimensions. And people, we look back on that and go, whoa, smart people with a very strange question. Well, I submit to you, long after we're all dead, people will go back and say, in the America, in the 20th and 21st century, people got really excited about something they called efficiency. and don't feel bad, it's all of us that they're making fun of, because it is preposterous. There is nothing there. It's a concept that has no meaning. So the question is, why would smart people, you and me and our colleagues, why would they believe in something so vacuous? And the answer is, it provides a philosophical need, an emotional need. See, we're a society, particularly in the United States, but in other countries too, which has a hard time with conflict. Let me go back to my example of the hospital. Some people want that hospital wing to be built. People who hope to have a job there, people who want the job building the damn place, people who are worried about cancer, whatever it is. And then there are a bunch of people who don't want it built. They live in the area, they don't want the traffic, they don't like the pollution, whatever. And they're fighting it out. And then the question is, you have to resolve this. But the problem if you have to resolve a struggle between two sides is that one side wins and the other side is pissed off. And there's a danger that those who lose will be resentful and angry and do something. What you need is a way to defeat people that makes them then promptly shut up, to accept being defeated. Efficiency does that. We're gonna smash you, but it's not that we win and you lose. Neither of us wins or loses. It's that which is the universal truth that we all should bow down to. It's efficient. Efficiency in our culture is what in other cultures is said as follows: God wants it this way. So let's not fight, you and me. This is going to be resolved. It's not you win, I lose. It's fill in the blank wants it, and that's why it must be this way. Efficiency is our God, and it has exactly as much substance and reality, the one as does the other. If you are not a religious person, efficiency should not be a word that passes your lips. Whereas if you are deeply religious, efficiency is just another way of spelling God, especially in economics. Yeah.
So, but cost-benefit analysis is like a principle that you could apply to your everyday decisions as an individual. So, when you want to decide should I do X, you can say this is the pros, these are the cons. So, and it seems like that would be a better way, trying to weigh. And of course, it's not going to be, you cannot be sure. It's going to be like an educated guess. But it seems like it's an educated guess. It would be preferable to just drawing it off and, saying yes or no. Right?
Well, I ask you, the important things in life. Am I going to marry him or her? Let's see, the costs of marrying him. You must be kidding. Marriage is a long-term arrangement. You haven't the faintest idea what the costs are going to be. And you haven't the faintest idea what the benefits are going to be. You can do that exercise, especially if you come from a culture that then says you shouldn't do it before you go through an. That's like having 3 prayers before you have your meal. You shouldn't eat that bread until you have thanked this one, this one, this one, and the one in the tree. Why not? It's your cultural form. So in our culture, we weigh the costs and benefits. We pride ourselves on rationality. Let's see, am I going to the store now? Oh, there's a chance I could get hit by a truck, and then there's lightning, and then I might find my true love in the tomato section. You could do all that, but most of us know, although this is gender, the women know this better than the men, that there's a little bit of a fakery going on here. That we're nervous about, for example, saying, let's see where life takes me. I mean, some of us manage that, but most of us find that very difficult. So we don't want to go where life in its complexity takes us. We want to have made the proper decision. And we want that because our mother told us when we were little to do it that way. And she was not pleased when we didn't. So we learned that. So one mother teaches you to pray to Saint Sebastian before you eat tomatoes, and another one asks you to weigh the costs and benefits of eating a tomato. Makes you feel better, do it. As long as you don't make claims that you've made the right choice, which, by the way, is what it's really for, the objective choice, the correct choice. In economics, my colleagues, they say, well, if you don't have a cost-benefit analysis, how do you know whether to invest in there or there? And the answer is you don't. It's always a struggle. You invest over there. Some people will be happy they want it. Other people will be unhappy they don't want it. There's going to be a fight. Either you recognize the struggle and take your side, or you pretend that you don't have to, that there's an absolute that doesn't require you to take sides. How convenient. You can be on the side that isn't the side. You don't have to take sides. There's an old American Union song that has the following chorus. Which side are you on, brother? Which side of the capital labor struggle? And there's always a large group of people, particularly those with lots of education, who avoid the difficulty of taking sides by imagining that there is a way to participate that is above the two sides. It's the efficient solution. That's a hustle. You know who wins in the struggle of efficiency? I have been on both sides. I've been called into courtrooms where I testified that A is more efficient than B. On the other side of the table are the lawyers for the other side who are saying, no, our studies indicate that B is more efficient than A. Who wins? The one with the most money can buy the most fancy research firm to produce the glossiest report about the whatever. And the jury goes with whatever is the fanciest show. By the way, you know why I get hired? Because I do cost-benefit analysis? Hardly. I've published work about the absurdity of efficiencies. If anyone ever read what I wrote, the last person on earth you'd want. Only because the other lawyers don't know anything about my publishing record, fortunately, that they don't bring it up and say, what the hell, you got a person testifying here who doesn't believe in what he just said, which is absolutely correct. But we don't have to worry, they don't know anything about it, they don't know how to look for articles, it's fine. So I'm in there, and you know why they get me? Not because of me and what I do, and certainly not because of my reputation, but because, ready, it's America, because I went to Harvard and Stanford and Yale, and I have all these pedigree degrees. So they say, you see, the professor from the day, he went to the bidet, it must be right. 3/4 of the time, the jury's full, that must be right. My opponent did a research, but he got a degree from the University of Tennessee. End of conversation, it's over. Tennessee only got 3 points. Harvard, 19 points. It's a football game, except it's won by the money, by the prestige. Who can buy? A Tennessee researcher is cheaper than a Harvard researcher. A lot cheaper. But no illusion here. The thing doesn't get passed because of efficiency. It's easy in any case to get people to say the efficiency is whatever you want. 3/4 of the time that I ever did efficiency studies was made crystal clear to me by the person hiring us, a group of us, what the result was that they wanted, which we gave them. Why? Because the only way we'd ever get a contract is if we were understood to be an understanding group of researchers who gave you what you paid for. We would never get another job if we were hired to show that A is more efficient than B and reach the result that the reverse was the case. So when you read about efficiency studies, laugh. The alternative is to cry, because this has got nothing to do with anything other than those with the money win. Okay, so that's why Marx wouldn't have thought about talking about efficiency. He could not have imagined in the 19th century the fetishization of efficiency that exists now. It wouldn't have dawned on him as a philosopher especially. Okay, let's then turn to how Marx analyzes commodities. He says what everybody's fascinated by is why the price of something in the market, why do you get $3 for a shirt rather than 300? Why does an ice cream cost this amount rather than something else? What explains it? So now let me, before I go on, deal with that, because that's not such a simple question. Why would people be so interested in prices? After all, a lot of other things go on in the economy. Production and how it works. How do people get together and make something? Not interested. Very little in economics about that. Really very little. What about the price? Why is the price so interesting? And for this, you have to understand the history of economics a little bit. Before markets, goods were distributed, as I told you. Priests did it. Lords of a manor distributed the output. Elders in the community distributed the output. suddenly human beings, and I'm going to exaggerate here a little bit to make the point, suddenly human beings were confronted by markets, a new arrangement. See, in the old days, I'm going to imagine I'm Farmer Gray. I grow potatoes. And I know my role in the village. I grow the potatoes, and then at harvest time I bring the potatoes to the village church, and there Father McGillicuddy sits down and decides, okay, 10 pounds of potatoes go to the Jones family, and let's see, 16 pounds to the Smith family, and he works out, and in turn I get some bread from the baker, some shirts from the shirt maker, and we distribute. I understand my role. It's very clear. I'm the potato guy. I make potatoes. I make them the same way each year. I get reasonably good harvest, except that the weather's bad, and I feed the villagers, just like they provide bread for me and so forth. Now introduce a market, and a sudden mystery enters into life. I make potatoes the way I always did. I produce the same bushel, same red potatoes. But now something bizarre happens. I don't go to the church and watch as Father McGillicuddy distributes these things. No, I go to an open field on market day. And I set up a little blanket, and there I have my potatoes, and people come up and they say, I'd like some potatoes. And I have to say, well, okay, I want some of your bread. And the guy says, okay, I'll give you one loaf for 10 pounds. And I go, what are you talking about? I've been giving you 10 pounds and getting 4 loaves every year. Yeah, the guy says, but you know, the conditions are a little different now. You get 1 loaf. I said, you know, I'm not going to have enough bread to eat if I give you all my potatoes. The number of loaves you're going to give me, 1 for every 10 pounds instead of 4. And the guy answers me, trained by Samuel, says, that's what the market is today. That's the price. Well, suddenly everybody realized mystery had entered life. Before, everything was understandable. I make potatoes, I distribute them, I get bread. But now there's a new institution that I don't understand, that called the market, in which I can work as hard this year as I did last. I can produce the same quantity and the same quality of potatoes, but I'm going to drop dead of hunger because it only gets me 1 bread for my 10 pounds instead. The market controls me. The market will determine my life. So I need to understand what causes prices to be what they are. It is the cry of an entire civilization as it goes from a non-market to a market system to cope with the new mystery. A mystery that wasn't there when there were no prices because there was no exchange. When Father McGillicuddy distributes it, you might not like the way he distributed, but you understand what's going on. Father McGillicuddy thinks you sin a lot, you lose. You understand. But a market, who could understand it? So a group of people began to develop in European society, where this thing went furthest, earliest, devoting themselves to answering the mystery, solving the mystery. What the hell causes prices to be what they... Why? Because one day I get a loaf for my 10 pounds of potatoes, and the next year or the next month I get 4 loaves. What's going on? Okay? Now I want to remind you again, Marx is not interested in this. Marx is not interested in this shift. It's an interesting shift, has effects, of course. Whether you have a market or non-market, but that's not what he's interested in. Remember? He's interested in the production and distribution of surplus. That's a completely different question. So Marx, looking at this bizarre interest in prices, is a philosopher and asks himself, why are people focused on that? And I just gave you the answer. He figured out why this was the issue. And so he began to say, let's see whether there's anything in the answers that people have come up with. In the 150 years or 200 years or 300 years in Europe that people have been trying to answer this question, I'm going to go through and see whether there's anything useful for me in my quest to look at surplus. Is there anything useful for me in what they have come up with in the way of answers to explain why prices are what they are? And I don't have a long amount of time here, so I cannot go through all that with you. But again, I remind you that the three-volume work of Marx is called Theories of Surplus Value, a different book from Capital, is where Marx makes comments on many of those other writers who try to figure out what causes prices to be what they are. Just so you get some idea of the richness. Some people thought prices were what they were because that's what God wanted. Christian Europe, right? God wanted, lots of theorists, God wants the prices to be that. Then there were theories that says God actually wants a different price. It's sinful people who departed from that. That's a variation. Then there was for a long time a belief that the prices of things were determined by God, but through nature. And through nature they meant land. That it was the amount of land it took to make something happen that somehow determined its price. The physiocrats, a very famous group of thinkers before the modern age, were interested in that. Nature, land. But Marx wasn't as taken with their answers, although he was interested and studied it. Marx got really excited when he turned to the great economic thinkers who really begin the profession, the people just before him, Adam Smith and David Ricardo. You remember I mentioned them to you. They are considered to be the fathers of modern economics. Adam Smith wrote about the time of the American Revolution, 1776, and about 25, 30 years later, David Ricardo wrote. So they each wrote basic founding books, and Marx was terribly excited by their explanation for why prices were what they were. Because Adam Smith and David Ricardo both agreed, and I know for some of you this will be a shock, but I hope it'll be one of many as we go along. What did Adam Smith and David Ricardo say was the explanation for the prices of goods in markets? The answer was both of them developed a labor theory of value. Some of you, I know, have taken some courses and read some books and are under the impression that this is Marx's invention. I wish, but it isn't so. Adam Smith, often considered the great champion of modern capitalism, and for good reason, and David Ricardo, who certainly was a champion of, they thought that labor explains the value of things. So the labor theory of value, a theory that says what values are what they are because of labor. Marx was excited because you can see why. Here he had a bridge to take us from a discussion of commodities and values, which everybody wants to talk about, to what he wants to talk about, which is how you organize labor. He was given an enormous assist by Smith and Ricardo because they, before he was born, had formulated the idea, if you want to know why something costs this amount of money versus that amount, the answer is, here we go, I'm not going to quote Adam Smith. The values of goods and services depend, quote, on the amount of toil and trouble needed to produce them. Oh, what an idea. The values of goods in markets are determined by the amount of labor needed to produce. So you want to know why a shirt costs $10 and a sneaker costs $40 and that rug costs $200? The answer is the amount of labor needed to produce it. Adam Smith and David Ricardo, that was their idea. Marx loved this. He was accepted. It was extraordinary. Marx loved this idea. And Marx took it from them, giving them ample credit. And Marx said, yes, he said, that's right. I think they have a very good point. That the value of commodities is linked to the labor needed to produce them. So strictly speaking, labor theory of value says the value of a commodity is determined by the amount of labor needed to produce it. But at that level, Marx is in agreement with Smith and Ricardo. Nothing new here. Let's see what this means. It means that, for example, if it takes me 2 hours, on the average, to make a shirt, and it takes me 2 hours, on the average, to produce a bushel of potatoes, then in the market, that's what the theory says, a bushel of potatoes will equal, what did I say, a shirt? A shirt. Why will one shirt equal a bushel of potatoes? Because they each of those two things requires the same amount of labor. The same amount of labor is in a bushel of potatoes as in one shirt. And the idea here is really simple. I am a worker. I could either make shirts or I could grow potatoes. If the amount of time it takes me to grow potatoes, I can exchange those potatoes for a shirt, and that will get me a shirt which I could have made myself in the same amount of time, I'm happy to grow either potatoes or make shirts. If, however, anything were to happen, you can do this little exercise at home if you want, to make the relationship between potatoes and shirts other than the amount of labor in them, let's say a bushel of potatoes got you 2 shirts, just let's imagine, then nobody in their right mind would spend, say, an hour, or whatever I say, an hour, to produce a shirt, because in an hour you'd have 1 shirt. You better use your hour to make a bushel of potatoes, and then in the market you exchange, you get 2 shirts. So your 1 hour via the potatoes gets you 2 shirts in the market. So guess what would happen? Right? Nobody would produce shirts, because it's irrational. Everybody would produce potatoes. But of course, if everybody produces potatoes, the supply of potatoes will go up. Meanwhile, the supply of shirts will go down because no one's making them. And that'll change the price back to the point where 1 hour worth of potatoes in the market exchanges for 1 hour worth of shirts. This was a simple logical argument that Smith, Ricardo, and everybody else at that time in England and in Western Europe took as obvious. You go with me? The labor theory of value was the dominant, obvious, logical explanation. Okay? Yes?
Did this theory take into account the fact that, let's say, people might prefer doing one thing rather than the other? So that if everybody liked growing potatoes rather than making shirts, they might prefer working 2 hours of growing potatoes than an hour and a half.
Mostly not. In those days, it was thought that labor being what it is, if you could spend less time doing labor and get the same bundle of goods, you were probably better off that way. So, but there may have been, I don't want to claim to know the whole literature, there may have been some people who worried about that, who might have taken this idea and said, you know, it doesn't always work because there could be certain kinds of preferences for this kind of good or this kind of labor that would get you something, but it was still the framework within which these questions were asked.
Would that be a problem for the labor theory of value?
Sure. Sure it could. Sure it could. For Smith and Ricardo, it actually did create such problems because they wanted it to be meant literally. They really wanted it to be meant literally, that you get as many, the ratio of the market of potatoes to shirts or anything to anything else had to do with the amount of labor it took. They wanted it held up. Marx did. Marx did. Marx developed a labor theory of value from theirs, but he changed it. Really very different. That's why one way you can test if you ever get spoken to by other professors, this is not a nice thing to do, but in case you enjoy this sort of thing, if you hear that professor tell you about the labor theory of value as if there's one, you know, you got the first sign that you should take another class. But this is an idiot. And a lot of my colleagues have no idea about any of this stuff. And that comes out of their mouth because no one's going to challenge them, but you can now, and you can make it a poignantly unpleasant moment for them, which you might want to do because students often like that. Teachers often deserve it. There are multiple labor theories of value. Smith's is actually a little bit different from Ricardo's, and Marx's is different from both of theirs, and there were others. There were others labor theories of value. How did Marx do his differently? Marx did 2 things that neither Smith nor Ricardo did. First, Marx was not interested, again, in explaining prices. So he didn't push the idea that the only thing that determines a price in a market is the amount of labor in it. He was interested that there was a relationship between price and labor. But the notion that that's all that determined the price struck Marx as ridiculous. That was much more important for people around Smith and Ricardo, but not for Marx. As you'll see, Marx just wanted to get us into the discussion of labor. So he was happy that there was some relationship between a price and labor, but he didn't care that it was exactly important. And the second thing Marx did that was different was he developed the notion that the labor in the labor theory of value shouldn't be what Smith and Ricardo. They actually thought you'd count up the hours that the carpenter uses to make a house relative to the amount of hours that the shoemaker uses to make a shoe. No, said Marx. The labor that determines value isn't, here we go now, what he called concrete labor. It's not the particular labor of the particularly skilled person. The carpenter here, the shoemaker there, the baker over there. No, he said. The thing that we have to understand is that the labor that's involved in shaping what goods exchange for is something, and then he coined a completely new concept, abstract labor. Abstract, no such, you can search through Adam Smith or David Ricardo, the phrase abstract labor never appears. In Marx's Capital, that's what all appears, almost only abstract labor. After he tells you it's not concrete labor, what those guys don't like, what do you mean by abstract labor? Here's what he meant. And you can see where he's going, because you all know the end of the story. We're getting over to the labor analysis. He says the value of commodities is determined by the available supply of labor in any economy. And here he says something that's interesting and wonderfully philosophical. He says in any community, the total of output that can be produced depends on the available labor before it's been specialized into this skill, this trade, that industry. You know, we have a certain number of people available to work. So many able-bodied, healthy adults between these ages and that. That's it. That's how much wealth we can produce. Namely, the wealth that could be produced by this group of people. He says, before we allocate, okay, you become a baker, you become a shoemaker, you become a potato grower. Before that, we have something called abstract labor, a kind of pool of the available labor supply. And then he says, you see where Marx is going, he says in every community, all the time, decisions have to be made as to how to allocate the abstract labor to all the specific tasks. If we take a bunch of people who could do anything and we train them to be shoemakers, they're not going to make potatoes. And they're not going to have those preferences either. And every society has to decide that. I mean, do you want a lot of people making potatoes or just a few? Do you want a lot of people making sandwiches or just a few? And every society is constantly assessing, changing the allocation of abstract labor into its specific functions, according to what the community wants, needs, the different influences of the different groups. Every society is always doing it. But, says Marx, below the level of consciousness, there is no explicit, let's see, we got 412,000 new babies this year. How many of them should we direct over into manual labor, and how many should we direct up? We don't do that. We have institutions that do that. Family pushes you here or there. School pushes you here or there. Priest or minister or rabbi pushes you here or there, and so on. But every society does it one way or the other, collectively or individually, in the family or not, in this institution or that institution, by fiat of government or by free choice. But every society does it. And the economy is partly shaped by this. Because, in the end, the value, comes Marx's argument, the value of every commodity is the amount of abstract labor allocated to. Every commodity has in it a portion of the abstract labor pool of the society. Couldn't be otherwise. That's not a complex argument. That's a tautology. Every commodity is the product of labor. Therefore, every commodity has in it some concrete labor that is the concrete allocation of the abstract labor available to the whole community. So, of course, in every commodity is embodied some portion of the abstract labor in the community. What the commodity exchanges for in the market is shaped in part by this allocation of the community's labor. But in other parts, it's shaped by the weather that day, people's preferences, attitudes of workers to their job, anticipation and expectations about what the future will bring. Millions of things shape how many shirts you get for potatoes this day in this market at that hour. And it changes all the time. But one of the important things that shapes it is how much labor in the community is embodied there. So now we go back to what we did at the beginning last time, a little epistemology. Marx is not saying, the way Smith and Ricardo did, that labor determines exchange in the market. Just that labor is part of the set of factors that determine that. And it's the part he wants to look at. And why? You all know. Because he wants to get over to how labor is organized. So of course, he wants to look at that aspect of the commodity that concerns labor. In contrast, mainstream economics, neoclassical, the dominant system, connects the value of commodities not to labor, to technology, to preferences. That's the big story. Why is something cost that much? Because people want it. They want a lot of it. And they make the price go up, but they want it. It's all about, it's very interesting, economics. It's all about psychology. It's all about desire. Modern bourgeois economics is an economics focused on desire. You probably noticed that when you took economics courses. Very erotic. That was an attempt at humor on my part. Yes?
Is there an account in Marx about, in terms of the abstract labor, having a blood function? I was thinking about paying farmers not to trade food. You have too many people, you know, is there an account? Because you kind of, I think something like that happened where you are sort of seen as being geographically paying people not to.
Right. He does that on occasion. It's not a major focus of it. He does it on occasion when he wants to show the irrationality of capitalism. Remember, he's writing at a time when Smith, Ricardo, and many others were celebrating, as I told you last week, celebrating capitalism as an engine of economic growth or an engine of efficiency. I mean, not that language, but an engine of much better production of wealth and so forth. So he loved to find and elaborate examples where the logic of capitalism not only didn't make for economic growth, but made for its opposite. And that would be a perfect example. When the whole structure of the market and capitalism would lead, for example, and this happens often, as you point out rightly, lead for a group of producers to see the logic of their situation as driving them to produce less that is wanted, needed, or desired in the society, because then they can jack up the price and they can make more money. So you have the farmers spill the milk, or the famous example of General Electric, which has had a light bulb that can last for 50 years, for the last 100 years, and do not release it, and control the patents on it, because they want you to have to buy a new light bulb every few weeks or months or whatever it is, etc., etc. Marx loved them, but he used them as illustrations, as sort of puncture holes in the self-grandizing fakery, he thought about it, of capitalism's virtues. Okay. Let me turn then to Marx playing with the labor theory of value as he understood it. Connecting commodities to labor. But before I do it, I want to stress what I just finished saying. Marx is interested in the labor story. So that's why he's interested in that part of the story of a commodity that relates to labor. He doesn't need to say, and he doesn't say, that it's the only thing that determines these things. The way he handles that, by the way, for those of you who are interested, is he theorizes a distinction, which is also present in Smith and Ricardo, but he makes more of it, a distinction between value and price. Price is what you actually pay in the market. Price is how many potatoes I had to give Tuesday at 4 o'clock for a shirt in the market. It's the actual exchange. Value is the amount of labor it takes to produce them. They don't have to be the same. All of Marx's 3 volumes are about how, where, when, and why prices and values are not the same. All kinds of things that can happen to make the price you actually pay be different from the value of the labor in it. And then he analyzes why that will happen and what the reactions of all the participants to this situation will be. So he has a theory of price and value. By the way, in modern bourgeois economics, neoclassical economics, there is no distinction. Those words are used synonymously. Price and value are synonyms. Not for Marx. Very clearly different. If you read Marx, you'll learn. But it's part of this notion I want you to get that he's interested in value, not in price. And he's interested in value because it connects commodity to labor. So now let's do it. Let's really do what Marx does. Marx begins by saying, okay, there are, in all markets, modern markets, 3 kinds of exchanges that happen. Earlier in history, they all happened too, but in different proportions. At one time in history, you only had the first one. C stands for commodity, and C prime stands for some other commodity. So this is potatoes, and the C prime, this is shirts. This first one at the top here, C, this is an exchange to which we now give the term barter. It's when I give you potatoes and you give me a shirt. Or I help you clean your garage and you give me 3 CDs or something. It's an exchange of commodity for commodity. And the labor theory of value says that in general, Marx would say, the amount of abstract labor in this is roughly equal to the amount of abstract labor in that, for the same reason of reallocation that I went through with you before. But Marx says in modern markets, something else has happened. Exchange and markets have become a bit more sophisticated. So now what we have is we don't really come to market with one thing and exchange it for another. We come to market with whatever it is we have to sell, and we sell it for money. And then we use money to buy whatever it is we want. So, if I am a potato farmer, I come with my potatoes and I sell them for money. And then I use my money to buy shirts, shoes, and anything else. So the modern form of exchange, when people have something to sell, they sell it for money. They sell for money, and then use the money to buy. Okay? But now Marx says, there is yet another player in the world of exchange, and this player poses a mystery. Because here we can see a certain amount of your labor embodied in potatoes is exchanged for that amount of labor embodied in something else. And here we can see a certain amount of labor is embodied in something. There's that amount of money, and you use that amount of money to buy something else. It's, as Marx calls it, these are exchanges that are based on equivalence. We want a different quality. We want to give up potatoes and get shirts. We give up potatoes for money to get shirts. But the value, the amount of labor in all of them is the same. Quantity hasn't changed. It's just quality that's changed. We want to give up one kind of thing to get another kind of thing. But look at this third one. This third one, Marx says, goes on in every market, but it is a mystery. Why? Because this is an exchange, a player in the market who doesn't begin with a commodity to sell, but begins instead with money. And this player uses money to buy a commodity which he then resells. See, notice here, this one enters the market, sells something in order to buy and consume it. This guy enters the market with something which he sells in order to buy something else and consume it. This guy is weird. What the hell is he doing? He enters with something called money, uses it to buy something, doesn't consume it. It has no interest in consuming it. Has only one interest: sell it. Well, it's even more mysterious, because the whole presumption here is quantitative difference. He doesn't start with one kind of thing and end up with another. He starts with one kind of thing and ends up with the same kind of thing. He begins with money, he ends with money. These people are driven by getting rid of one quality of thing for a different quality. These people start with one quality and hope to end up with the same quality. The only thing that drives these people is quantity. They start with a quantity of money and they want to end up with M prime, more money. And Marx says, what the hell is that about? Because, yeah, they're exchanging money for goods, goods for money, which is what these people are doing, goods for money, money for goods. But the whole purpose and logic are different. Now, a little footnote. For those of you that studied conventional economics basically goes like this. It really tells a story about this. It imagines that this is what's going on, that everybody in the end is only buying in order to eventually consume. These people never consume anything. These people are a mystery. These people enter the market, participate in buying and selling, but unlike these people, they're not interested in consuming anything ever. They are driven by a completely weird objective: to enter with money, to leave with money, identical, just to have more of it. And Marx says that's where we have got to go. And why would Marx be doing that? Because the difference between the money you have at the beginning and the money you have at the end, the logic, the goal, the purpose of these people's participation in a market economy is to make the value grow, to expand the quantity of money they have from M to M prime. To start, I'm going to now use Marx's language, to start with an amount of value M, and to do something with it so that you end up with the same amount of money you had at the beginning, plus an extra. Value becoming more value. Marx's language. Value acquiring surplus value. Something makes it possible for a person to do something such that the money he or she brings after going through some exchanges is more than it was at the beginning. These people don't care, that's not their interest. They start with an amount of value, an hour's worth of labor, and they end with that. They just change the form. Potatoes to shirts. Potatoes to money to shirts. Their goal is a different quality. They give up what they produce to get what they want to consume. These people are radically different. Now, a footnote on this side. The first theorists who figured out what I just did here was not Karl Marx. The first ones I ever encountered who talked about precisely this were Plato and Aristotle. And both of them, basically, they had differences, important differences, but both of them had this analysis that you might find intriguing. There were markets in Athens in the time of Plato and others. There were markets. They weren't the basic way goods were distributed, but there were markets. There were some goods that were produced and exchanged and distributed that way. And that was considered to be a very radical phenomenon in Athenian society. So both Plato and Aristotle were confronted with and devoted some of their writings to analyzing markets. This phenomenon of exchange and haggling as a way of distributing goods. Both Aristotle and Plato agreed that this phenomena disrupted Athenian society. It was negative. Footnote. Aristotle and Plato thought markets suck. Just so you know. And then he made a very sophisticated argument. They said, you know, particularly Aristotle, who was a little less harsh about markets than Plato, who was really against them. But both of them said, you know, this is okay. I mean, this is an honest transaction in the market. You come with one thing, and you exchange it for an equal amount of toil and trouble embodied in something else. You give up 3 hours of your work in the potatoes to get 3 hours of work in a shirt. That's fair. That's, I mean, you don't like it. This, however, they both came down on as disgusting. These people, they're not about equal. They're about unequal. They come with something and they want to take back more than they came with. The stinkers, the crooks. They wanted it banned. Specifically said this should not be allowed. This is the bad thing about markets. This is all about greed. Now again, an aside, for some of you that are literary. Think of the literary character that is described here. This is a person who comes with money to get more money. Everything he touches, he only touches in the interest of making more money. Whatever he buys is to resell for more. Midas, the image of the myth, the notion of the person who couldn't connect to anybody else, for whom every transaction and every other person had become a means to what was driving him relentlessly forever forward. Because of course, when you take your money and you buy something to resell it more, what you do is take this money and reproduce this activity forever. Okay? This is a mystery that has agitated all commentators on economics, from at least ancient Greece to the present. What is this about? Is this sick? Is it evil? Is it natural? Is it good? What is this? For those that have even understood this much. And Marx is part of this group. He wants to understand, what is this? What is going on here? How does this work? What are the consequences of this being part of all modern markets? So, like a good theorist, he begins to analyze it. The first example, the one that probably comes to your mind, is the example of someone who has a name in modern society, as this person had a name in a long time. This is the description of a merchant. A merchant. A merchant is a person who begins with money and buys objects in order to resell them for more money. Many of you have occasions to visit your neighborhood, in quotation marks, convenience store. What the hell is that? That's a merchant. You go in there and you buy a bottle of Pepsi and a bag of potato chips. You do understand, even without Marx, that whatever you pay that fellow in the convenience store, he bought those things for less. And he's simply reselling them to you, and he keeps the difference. He starts with M, 60 cents for the bottle of soda. M, he gives up 60 cents, he gets a bottle of soda, and he turns around and sells it to you for $1.50. He has taken his money, his value, and he has made it expand. He started with 60 cents, and after you come in there to buy the soda and the potato chips, he has $1.50. Merchant. Now Marx begins to see where he's going to go. So I'm not going to use more of his language so that you recognize it when you read it, if you read it in capital itself. In these two cases, what everybody accepts is kind of reasonable exchange. When money appears, Marx says, it simply acts as money. Money acts as money. What does he mean? It enables one kind of good to exchange for an equal value of another kind of good. But in these transactions, Marx says, money acts in a different way. It's not the means for one person to get rid of what he has and acquire something else, equal value for equal value. No, here, the whole point is to make your value grow. You engage in this kind of activity to make your value expand. And here comes the punchline. When you use money in a modern capitalist economy, or indeed in any economy, if you use money to make more money, then you're using money as capital. The definition of capital is self-expanding value. That's Marx's definition. Capital exists where and when money can be used in such a way as to become more over and over and over again. A merchant is the perfect example. The merchant buys in order to resell. He buys with money that he hopes by means of reselling to make into more money. But of course, the merchant is therefore engaged in something, Marx says, that smells. Either when he bought the Pepsi bottle for 60 cents, he was getting more than he paid for it. And then, let's suppose it's $1.50 Coke. If he bought it for 60 cents, then obviously he's giving less than he's getting. Then he turns around and sells it to you. His sale to you is an equal exchange. He's giving you $1.50 worth of Coke and you give him $1.50 worth of money. So either your convenience store ripped off the Pepsi-Cola company, not likely. That's possible. Or the convenience store gave 60 cents to Pepsi for something that is worth 60 cents. And then he turned around and gave you something worth 60 cents and you gave him $1.50. Schmuck. Right? But something is unequal here. Somehow, either the buying of that Coke or the reselling of it involved an unequal exchange, a hustle. Something smells here. And this is not just a Marxian argument, it's a cultural universality. Merchants are always suspected. You all know that because you suspect it. You understand somewhere, even if you've never been in a class, that there's something about that merchant that's a little smelly. And merchants have always had to deal with the kind of crude grasp of the population that there's something going on here that isn't quite, if you pardon the triple entendre, kosher. And so merchants have had to develop over centuries elaborate arguments, that's a polite word for bullshit, to justify this.
Now, obviously, there's labor in there, particularly in the merchant that, say, in the origins of capitalism, when you have shipping merchants and things like this, there's time and a form of labor. So I'm just wondering, and surely Marx must have recognized this in some way. So is it simply a problem of being uniquely unable to value that labor?
No.
I mean, there's something legitimate that we can say that the merchant does, but in some way.
In Volume 2 of Capital, there are long chapters about transportation, about merchants, when they move, how to handle the labor, exactly your question. And Marx calls that part of the labor of a commodity. So that labor is added to the work of producing it, the work of moving it around physically is considered to be productive labor, which a merchant might do or a producer might do. So he deals with that precisely. But he's talking about merchants in the literal buying and selling. Let me give you an example from modern society that will make you understand. There are people in what we nowadays call the wholesale business or the jobbing business. All they do is they buy stuff. They buy it, and then they resell it. They don't move it, they don't touch it. It actually sits in a certain place. They take ownership of it, they buy it, wherever it is, and they sell it to somebody who picks it up from wherever it is. They are the pure merchant. They buy and resell. There are plenty of examples, past and present, for this sort of thing. Okay? They, therefore, are engaged in an unequal exchange. Let me give you the most dramatic example in the United States, in the world right now. The largest single corporation in America, largest employer and biggest corporation in the United States, is the Walmart Corporation. They don't make anything. They are a company that buys and resells. That's all they do. And they're the biggest employer in the United States. They're bigger than any producing company. They are a merchant. They buy and they sell. And that's all over the place. So Marx is intrigued by this. He says there's another kind of person who starts with an amount of money in a market and ends up with more money, who uses money as capital, because that's all capital is. Money used to make more money. Not money used to buy something to consume. No. Something. A merchant buys in order to resell. Who's the second one? And the answer is the money lender, or in modern language, the bank. The bank starts with a quantity of money, lends it to you. Under the rule, you must give them back more than they gave you. That more is the surplus value, the amount that your value grows through and in and by means of the act of lending. So the merchant can take money and make more money, can use money as capital. And the money lender can use money as capital. And Marx says those two, merchants and money lenders, have been part of markets wherever markets arose, whether it be in ancient Greece or medieval Europe or modern Spain or any other place. So he says, you know, that really, this capital has been around a long time. Capital isn't new. This is really important, folks. Capital isn't new. And if you want to use the word capitalism, it isn't new either. This was happening, as I told you already, in ancient Greece. That's why Plato and Aristotle wrote about it. So this, the use of money as capital, capitalism, is very old. But, says Marx, here comes now, you can see where he's going. Marx says there is something new now. For the first time, he says, this happens not only in money lending and not only in merchanting, buying in order to resell, but what is new and different, what makes capitalism the new system in the world, is the stunning reality. This is Marx now. This is his creative insight. That for the first time, capital happens in production. Not lending in money, not buying to resell, but in the production of goods and services. The basic thing that human communities do to keep themselves alive, to produce the goods and services by labor without which we can't live. Food, clothing, shelter, etc. Capital, which always existed in lending and in merchanting, that always existed wherever markets arose, just about. The new thing, that which happens in Europe in the 17th and 18th century and spreads to the world, is the capture by capital of production. The spread of capital into production. The takeover of production. So that production becomes, here we go now, subordinated to making money out of money. That's new, says Marx. That's what's different. That's the new thing about capitalism that we need to investigate, having arrived at it through a discussion of commodities and markets, which is where everybody thought economics was. He's now moving us into production. He's giving the focus, moved it from the realm of exchange to the realm of production. Because he has said in a way that the rules of exchange, this kind, capital, self-expanding value, has taken over production. So he asks himself, and he answers his own question, how does this work? And that's what we're going to end today. It works as follows. And by the way, if you want the particular analysis we're about to go through, it's in the opening chapters of volume 2 of Capital. The area called the metamorphosis of capital, or the circuits of capital. That's where what I'm about to do is actually contained. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but it's the logic I would see is a little bit different from Marx's. But remember, Marx didn't write volumes 2 and 3, and so I could argue that he would have done it this way. Anyways, let's follow what Marx means. The capitalist, not the money lender, who in volume 3 is called the money-lending capitalist. Notice Marx's language, the money-lending capitalist. And it's not the merchant who is called in Marx the merchant capitalist. No, we're now going to turn to what Marx calls the industrial capitalist. Please note in the back of your mind, in volumes 2 and 3, a systematic distinction is made. Whole chapters, whole parts of the book, encompassing multiple chapters, are devoted to money-lending capitalists, merchant capitalists, and industrial capitalists. Therefore, the next time you read an article or a book by somebody purporting to represent Marxist theory, who uses the word capitalist without a qualifying adjective, you got another idiot. Go take a course in underwater basket weaving. This person is really making big mistakes. So what is an industrial capitalist? This new thing that Marx says is what we have to understand. And you know where he's going. He's going to the surplus store. An industrial capitalist begins with money. That's what he does. Just like a merchant or a money lender. But unlike a merchant or a money lender, he doesn't lend the money. And unlike a merchant, he doesn't buy stuff in order to resell it. Our industrial capitalist buys two kinds of things. Means of production. That's a general term to incorporate tools, equipment, raw materials. He buys tools, equipment, raw materials, factory space, office space, whatever he needs. And he also hires LP, labor power. So he uses his money to buy means of production and labor power. Buys tools, equipment, and raw materials, and hires workers. He then combines these two together in P, the act of production. He says to the workers he's hired, stand there, do this with this machine on these raw materials in this way. After a period of production, there is an output, C, commodity, something, whatever they produce in this factory. Ladders, widgets, combs, eyeglasses, whatever. And then the capitalist sells these outputs for money. And the whole point of it is that whatever the money was he had at the beginning, he will have more at the end. That's what modern capitalism is. It's when industry, when production is under the same rule and force that used to govern just lending and merchants. That the game, the point, is to produce. A feudal lord didn't do this, didn't begin with money, didn't end up with more money, and nothing to do with feudalism. Likewise, a slave owner. Likewise, an ancient tribe, communist, communal tribe. They didn't function like this. This is what is new. And so Marx now says, let's follow the logic. If this is an equal exchange, if you have $100 worth of money, and you buy $100 worth of tools, equipment, raw materials, and $100, and including the workers you hire, and you put them to work, how is it you end up with something that'll get you more money? I mean, you put in $100, if this would say the 125 at the end. If you put in 100, how do you get out more? Assumedly, the means of production, the tools, equipment, and raw materials are used up. Basically, what you do is you transform it. From a hammer, it becomes the chair. That's the output. From the glue, it's still there. It just is in a different form. Labor is the transformation of these goods into that. That's what work is. You take a tree and you make a chair. You take wool and you make a shirt. The wool is still in the shirt, and the lumber is still in the chair. So the value of the stuff you use up is over here. It's still here. It's just changed its form. Well then, let's look here, Marx says. Could this, we hire workers, do we get from the workers when they work what we put into them when we hire them? And he says, wait a minute. And the big light bulb goes off. And the eureka moment has happened. Of course, Marx is playing with us. But he writes it that way, as if it's a moment of great discovery. He says, wait a minute, labor power, hire a worker. Maybe the name of the game in capitalism is to hire a worker, pay him, buy the labor power from the worker like a commodity. Like you would buy a chair from a chair maker, we buy from you your ability to work. Literally your capacity. That's the deal, right? When you go to work, you come at 8 o'clock in the morning and you stay till 5, and you do what I tell you. I don't want you to bring an object. Bring you. Bring your brains and your muscles, which I will direct you what to do with for those 8 hours. After that, you're on your own. So the capitalist buys the labor power of the worker. A deal is struck. You're the worker. You sell your capacity to work because you own it. I'm the capitalist. I buy it from you. I buy your capacity. You come at 9, you stay till 5, and I'm going to tell you what to do with the tools, equipment, and raw materials that I purchased for you to work with. And now Marx says, wait a minute. The value you give to the worker for his labor power, maybe it's systematically less than the value the worker adds by working. Oh, maybe in the contract, the deal between the capitalist who hires and the worker who sells his or her labor power, maybe in that contract there is a difference between what the worker is paid and the value added by the worker's labor. If that were the case, then we would have an answer to the mystery, says Marx. We would give the workers 50, let's say, out of 100, 50 bucks for tools, equipment, and raw materials, 50 bucks to hire the workers. The 50 bucks of tools, equipment, and raw materials show up in the final product. But what shows up in the final product as contributed by the workers is the labor they did, not what they were paid. So let's suppose that were the case, says Marx. Then the mystery is solved. Capitalism can take over industry if and only if the workers will work for less value than their labor adds to what the capitalist sells. That's what we talked about all last week. Capitalism is a system in which M can become M prime. The capitalist gets surplus value because what he pays to the worker in value is less than what the worker adds to the value of output by his labor. Remember the story of last week? I used as the example from your life. When you sit down with an employer and you dicker over your job that you're hoping to get, and you agree to come and work at this place, and he agrees after haggling with you to give you, I think I used $22 an hour, or some number like that last week. And I had you all pretty much agreeing, right, that the only way an employer is ever going to give you $22 an hour to come there and work is if an hour of your work will give him more stuff to sell at the end of the week than $22. If your labor produced an extra $22 worth of stuff for him to sell by having you there, and he had to take the extra $22 he got from what you produced and give it to you as your wage, there'd be nothing in it for him. And he wouldn't do it. And you all nodded. And this is Marx. That's right. The only way you're ever going to get hired is if you produce more in the output than it costs him to have you come and work there. And that difference, the difference between the value added by a worker's labor and what's paid to the worker, that's the prime. That's where surplus value comes from. Capitalists can be active in industry. Capitalism can take over industry. If and only if the working class of people accept this role. The minute the worker said, we're not doing that, then on that day, take our hat off, capitalism is over. Finished. It can have functioned. The capitalist cannot get his capital to be fruitful. In fact, the very language, capital is fruitful, is awesome, which no Marxist would ever allow let go. Capitalist is fruitful? What just happened here? The capitalist is ripping off the worker. He's taking from the worker more than he gives him. And Marx says therein lies the secret of capitalist industry. And look what he's done. He has taken us from a discussion of commodities and exchange nice and sweetly over to the question of labor, thanks to Smith and Ricardo, and from that into the whole area of production, and by examining this peculiar capital, money used as capital, asking how it spreads to industry, he has finally answered these questions, and in the process given us the most important contribution of his work, the theory of surplus value. That in production, M can become M prime. Money can act as capital and grow if and only if it's able to pay for a worker's labor less than the value added by that worker when he or she labors. And based on that insight, which we will begin with, I'll go over it again at the beginning of next week on Monday, we will then ask the next question that comes. Once we understand where the surplus arises, we're going to examine the workers who produce it, the capitalists who get it, and then how those capitalists who get it distribute it around the society and how that shapes the politics and the culture and everything else. We've run out of time. I will see you next week, 5:30.